Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure. I love celebrants, so you'll hear why in a few minutes. So it's really an honor to be here. I've been planning gay weddings since 2004. We've worked with couples from 33 different US states and from around the world. My company plans big weddings, and we plan small weddings, the full productions, and the little elopements. I believe that every one of those weddings changes the world. And throughout my talk today, I'll be telling some of those stories. Back in 2003, I was working at a nonprofit organization in downtown Boston, planning their events. I was on my way to the train one morning when I heard on the radio that later that day, there would be a verdict on the case challenging the state's ban on same-sex marriage. I was on pins and needles. While at work, I kept refreshing the homepage of Boston.com, waiting for the ruling. Sometime around lunch, the decision was announced that the state may not deny the protections, benefits, and obligations conferred by civil marriage to two individuals of the same sex who wish to marry. It wasn't over, of course. The opposition wanted to amend the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and for the next 6 months, there were hearings and protests and tearful and inspiring speeches at the State House. I took long lunches, went over there after work, and completely got caught up in the fight for marriage equality. There I am. Back in the day, at some point, I looked around at all those couples and I thought to myself, someone's going to plan these weddings, and it might as well be me. And I knew, given my background in event planning and given my passion for LGBT advocacy, that I was going to be that person. History was being made in Massachusetts, and on May 17, 2004, the law changed and same-sex couples began to legally marry for the first time in United States history. And that's coming up, the 8-year anniversary is next month. By that time, we were open for business for about 3 months, so we've been in business now 8 years, and our first wedding ever was that Saturday, May 22nd. From the beginning, I knew that I wanted to be more than just a party planner. The world is so heterosexist, and the wedding industry is so focused on the bride, and only one bride, and that's not the path that I wanted to take with my business. I knew that if I was going to be successful, I needed to be my client's advocate. That's what felt right to me. I'm an activist-y type person. That's just who I am. I didn't want to be merely a wedding planner. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not what felt right to me. And it's still that way. Even though the laws have changed in a few other states since then, I really encourage you all to be advocates for your clients, for your LGBT clients, and for your straight clients. Because, for example, did you know that in 29 US states, it's legal to refuse services to a couple just because they're gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender? Those are states where a wedding photographer could literally say to a couple, I won't shoot your wedding because you're gay. Could you imagine hearing that when planning your own wedding? It's not fun, and it's the reality that same-sex couples face. They literally have to come out of the closet over and over and over again to the professionals they hire and the professionals they don't. I want you to be an advocate for your same-sex clients. How many of you get asked, can you recommend a great photographer, or can you recommend a great caterer? Have you ever stopped to ask those photographers and caterers on your referral list, what's your experience or what's your comfort level with same-sex weddings? If you haven't, I challenge you to, because you may be surprised by some of the answers you get. Some of those people on your typical referral list may have no interest in LGBT clients, or they might get really uncomfortable if you bring it up. But there's only one way to find out. You have to ask. If you connect your LGBT client to a non-gay friendly photographer, you're going to look really bad, and that's not good for anyone's business. You may also know that same-sex marriage is not recognized by the federal government, and that married LGBT couples don't have access to more than 1,000 rights, including Social Security, Medicaid, getting a green card, and many more. Did you know that when same-sex couples travel out of the state in which they're legally married, that in most cases that marriage is no longer recognized? It means that a couple like my wife Jen and I had to pay all these extra legal fees and have special paperwork drawn up so that we have legal standing if something happens, something bad happens when we on a trip somewhere. We had to adopt my son, even though my name is on the birth certificate and so is hers. When we travel to a state in which our marriage is not recognized, we have to have that extra adoption paperwork for me to have some access to him if something bad happens. Still, 84% of same-sex couples will have a legal marriage ceremony, not just a commitment ceremony, even if they don't live in a place where gay marriage is legal. It's very important for those couples to have the legal recognition, even if it's not a federal recognition, even if it's not recognized in their home state. I want to challenge you to find some business people in your area who specialize in helping same-sex couples protect their families. People like estate planning attorneys and financial planners who specialize in the LGBT community. Estate planning and financial planning is different for us. Make sure you tell your clients and help them understand that if, for example, they live in Texas but marry in New York, that their marriage is not valid. Encourage them to speak with an estate planning attorney so they can take the necessary steps to fully protect their family. For same-sex couples, marriage is simply not enough. And many LGBT couples, they don't know it. They don't understand the laws. But I challenge you to be their advocate and their educator. Linking your LGBT clients with those other resources will show them your commitment to truly protecting their family. Marriage is not enough. It's crazy that this is our truth in 2012. But can you believe that 45 years ago, interracial marriage wasn't legal? That Loving versus Virginia case that went to the Supreme Court was just 45 years ago in some of our lifetimes. I know that someday we'll look back at this time in history and laugh that there was ever a day when there was such a thing as marriage inequality, and I can't wait. But the world is changing, and it starts with those weddings. I want to tell you about these clients of mine, Joanne and Terry. Joanne, who you see right there, is being escorted down the aisle in a United Church of Christ church by her 85-year-old father. Joanne was born a man. For the first 50 years of her life, she lived as Jeff. And now she's a trans woman and an advocate and an educator. She wrote a book, which is why she allows me to tell her story, because she's an educator. And I worked with them, she and her partner Terry, to help her become the bride she'd always wanted to be. So together we found her that wedding dress. She was worried that her shoulders were too broad and she didn't have hips. She was worried about her hairpiece coming off when she was trying on dresses. And everything was perfect. She was beautiful in dress after dress. And when her wedding day finally came, it felt to me like I was giving them a gift. It felt more moving than any wedding I'd ever been a part of because of their story. And their story was told during the ceremony, of course. And that is absolutely one of my favorite weddings. This is them dancing their first dance. The Boston Gay Men's Chorus is singing the song, A Love That May Never Grow Old, from the Brokeback Mountain soundtrack. So they're singing it live on their special day. My wife Jen, my son Patrick, and I live in New York now, where I grew up. Since the law is fairly new here in New York, or there in New York, I'm frequently asked the question, what's the difference between a straight wedding and a gay wedding? And the answer is a lot, and also not very much at all. I hear it all the time, love is love. But in the eyes of many family members and politicians, love is not love, and that makes planning a gay wedding much more complicated. For example, almost all of my clients have some family members, often parents, who don't accept the marriage and won't attend the wedding. 63% of same-sex couples have the emotional support of both sets of parents when planning their wedding, which means that 37% of same-sex couples have some combination of no support. It's very emotional when one of my brides tells me about her dad who won't attend the wedding, or the groom whose mom won't dance with him and actually would rather not be there. Sometimes my wife assists me on wedding days, and a lot of people think my wife looks straight. I can't tell you how many times my wife has been on site with me on a wedding day when a cousin or aunt or someone comes up to her and says things like, "I can't believe I'm here, I really don't want to be here." People are venting to my wife because they assume she's straight and they assume she can relate. And then there's the matter of the aisle. Who walks down the aisle last? What if there are no brides? What if there are two brides? We work it all out, often with two aisles, so each partner gets his or her moment, and I get another place to decorate. 30% of same-sex wedding ceremonies have all of the guests standing. 13% have two aisles, 57% have one aisle. 81% of grooms enter the ceremony spaced down one aisle holding hands, but 30% of lesbians, so a third of lesbians, enter the ceremony down two aisles or from two different directions. So they both get to be the bride, as they should be, and they both get their moment. Here's some photos. Some photos of two aisles. So in this case, they, my pointer, whoop, they, one of them walked down one side and the other one walked down the other side, and they met on the landing, and then they walked down to the steps for an introductory toast, which I'll talk about in a second, and then they walked back up to the landing for the ceremony. There's two aisles. This is a case where they're walking in together or from two different directions, and then they go down one aisle with their dad, so we made that aisle extra big. Walking in together, holding hands. Walking in together, holding hands. So lots of different options, but isn't it fun having options? I definitely love it. So yeah, the wedding planning is different for same-sex couples, but the weddings themselves are actually pretty similar. They just feel much different. Same-sex weddings usually, of course, have the ceremony, the cocktail hour, then dinner and dancing. You know, we sit at chairs, have a nice dinner, toasts, cake cutting. The cake topper is not going to be a bride and a groom, of course, but it's pretty predictable. But as you've probably noticed in your experience, gay weddings are often not religious or traditional. They frequently don't have things like receiving lines or garter tosses. Only 8% of same-sex weddings take place in houses of worship. And 36% of the time, there are no members in any wedding party. But the love is there and rich, and in the hundreds of legal weddings in which I've been a part, there is an amazing sense of equality and spirit of triumph. The energy is exhilarating. It's addictive. I've had clients in their 80s, together 40 years, and those couples can finally, legally, get married a few places in the world. The weddings celebrate that achievement and do not take it for granted. I also love how much fun we can have with the ceremony. We don't have to follow the rules. What rules? I talked a little bit about how we can be creative with a processional, but we can also be creative in so many other ways too. For example, you may have noticed that lots of same-sex weddings start with champagne or drinks even before the ceremony starts. I am not a big fan of a full bar before the ceremony, because then I have to herd the guests. But I love the past champagne. It sets such an elegant tone, doesn't it? The guests are delighted, and it sends a signal to them that this is something to be celebrated. If they are used to very traditional ceremonies, pre-ceremony champagne sends a signal that this is something different and something special. I don't like that champagne to go to waste, however. I like it to have a purpose. So we like to start the ceremony with a toast, or a blessing, or a community vow, some way to immediately engage the guests, to get some audience participation. One of the consistent comments I hear from my clients after the wedding is, "I've never felt so validated," or "I've never felt so affirmed." And I can relate. Walking down the aisle after my own legal wedding ceremony was one of the most validating moments of my life. Looking around the room and seeing all of those people, some of whom flew in from overseas, some of whom were 80-year-old aunts, was incredible. They were there to show their support of us. I encourage my guests to capture those feelings of validation so they can be transported back to that moment. And one of the ways we capture that validation is to ask the guest to sign something inspired by the ketubah and the Quaker marriage certificate. We call it the foundation covenant. You can call it a sign-in board or whatever you like, but basically it's a way to have the guest's signatures be part of a frameable art, not a guest book that's put away on a shelf and never looked at again. The couple can see it in every day and remember how they felt being validated by all the love in the room on their wedding day. Our covenant hangs in our bedroom. So here are some examples. Guests are signing it. This is actually from modernketubah.com. It's a website. You can buy them. Here's another example. This is the couple's wedding logo is at the top, and that's on all their invitations and the rest of their wedding material. So they can take lots of different looks, and I'm sure you've seen them before, but that's basically the concept. It just makes a lot of sense. As I said before, the ceremony is the most important part to me. I tell my clients that if they don't put care into their ceremony, they are missing an opportunity to create change. That's why I refer my clients to celebrants whenever possible. I myself was married by a celebrant. Some of you may know her, Cindy Matchett from Massachusetts. She emailed me yesterday to wish me good luck. She's that much a part of our lives still. She's a very special person to my family, and she not only officiated our wedding 3 years ago, but she also led our son's baby blessing and officiated the wedding of some of our dearest friends. She means the world to us, and people are still saying how our wedding was the best they'd ever been to. And it all started with what Cindy created for the ceremony. So I get it. I understand the power you hold. I just hope you do too. Speaking of Cindy, that's her with clients Stephen and Glenn. Stephen and Glenn contacted me a few years ago when they were about to have a baby and they were freaking out. They had a child coming by surrogate in a few months. And those guys are from the UK. They lived in Boston and they owned a beautiful brownstone in Boston. They had this baby coming and they're like, whoa, we're not married, we should have some sort of wedding. So they contacted me and we threw something together, literally put something together pretty quickly for them. And Cindy put together an amazing ceremony in their brownstone. So you've probably noticed that with a lot of same-sex couples, the ceremonies might only be 20 or 30 guests or 50 guests, but they're small. And this was a perfect example of that, in which we had a beautiful, intimate ceremony in their home. Beautiful home. We had a jazz quartet playing. We had champagne before the ceremony, of course, about a half an hour of pre-ceremony champagne and a few nibbles. Then we did a standing ceremony. Took some pictures afterwards with the guests, and then we brought everyone in town cars, to a beautiful restaurant, one of the nicest restaurants in the city, for a dinner party for 30. And that was it. I mean, it was an 8-course meal and beautiful toasts, and that was the experience we created. A month later, we planned their holiday party for 100 guests. So we sort of had a 2-part event. So they got to have the small, intimate ceremony, followed by the holiday party. They never called me for the baby shower, but I think they could handle that on their own. Weddings are the great equalizer in America. Regardless of the style or the budget, for many families, weddings are an expected rite of passage. The fairy tale, the mother's dream, the father's pride. And bit by bit, same-sex couples are being invited to participate in this rite of passage. And as crazy as it sounds, I believe gay weddings change the world. Gay weddings show young LGBT kids that it really does get better. They create a ripple effect which can lead to profound social change. Think about it. You may know a great unmarried gay couple who have been together for years, but do you know or celebrate their anniversary? I've seen it firsthand many times. No matter how accepted and loved that couple may be by their straight friends and family, the experience of a legal wedding finally makes them equal. Those anniversaries finally count and are finally remembered. In many states, the right of whom may marry falls in the hands of the voters. And for same-sex couples, that's a very dangerous proposition. Just ask all of the LGBT couples in California where there were 18,000 legal same-sex weddings for 6 months in 2008 before the voters decided otherwise by passing Proposition 8. How would you like your right of whom may marry to be decided by voters? And since the voters and the politicians have so much power over the civil rights of the minority, I believe it's my responsibility as a gay wedding planner and your responsibility as a celebrant to make every wedding count and every guest cry. Many of my clients have felt an obligation to invite guests, those people that go up to my wife, including parents who weren't totally on board with the gay wedding thing, guests who showed up anyway, but were clearly less than thrilled to be there. I want those guests to cry. I want to see tears of equality, tears of, finally they're equal, or maybe just tears of, wow, that couple is just like me. See, those tears of equality become stories told to friends, neighbors, coworkers, and hopefully elected officials. Those stories create a ripple effect. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. once said, "Those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance."